Welcome, everyone. Episode 24 of the Dolphins Make Me Cry podcast. We're going to call this the post-mortem of the season, 8-9. And I'm going to apologize right off the bat because I am not happy with an 8-9 season off of the money spent, the investment in this team, the trades that were made in the last 2 years, the tank job of 2019, seeing the Texans in the playoffs in a trade for Tunsil where, you thought you fleeced them, but really they fleeced you because they have playoff appearances and wins and division championships. And the Dolphins sit there stuck in the middle as they pretty much have been for the latter part of what's now 25 years without a playoff win, the longest drought in the NFL. It's been 16 years since they've hosted a playoff game and won a division, 2008. And there's so much to go over in what went on in the Jet game, of which I predicted them to lose. And they just basically just laid down for the most part. Defensively, look, the defense this year with a good coach and Anthony Weaver did a good job. But the offense, Tyler Huntley, and I love it. If we can go back, not to jump around, Tyler Huntley has one decent game against Cleveland, and you got all these pundits in the media. Oh, the Dolphins are looking at bringing him back as a second string. Give me a break, okay? Just give me a break. I'm just stop. He's not any good. He's your third string quarterback on your roster at best. He was a fourth string quarterback who got cut by the Browns. I mean, if you can't make a team of the Browns as a quarterback, as a backup or a third string, you should really look yourself in the mirror. Good dude, played hard. He's not what I want as my number two. But I digress, not to go off on an angry tangent here on the Dolphins Make Me Cry podcast, because ultimately, I named it correctly. They never stop making us cry as Dolphin fans. But I will give you this little sliver of hope. At the end here, I want to focus on the positive as to what this team is going to do moving forward in free agency, in the draft, in the post-June cuts, and how they're going to construct the roster for 2025. It's going to be a long off season. It's going to be a painful off season with this disgust that you have in your mouth on the season. But that being said, we'll get to some positives at the end, I promise. I don't want to be the rambling, screaming guy, but I think I'm going to be that for a little bit here. So I'm going to start right here. So obviously the Dolphins lose the game to the Jets last week. And all the hubbub of Tyreek Hill, late in the third quarter, basically taking himself out of the game. Then in the post-game interview, he kind of answered questions correctly for a while. And then he basically says, I want out of Miami. I'll give you my take on that first. One, we all know Tyreek is a clown. Okay, he's an absolute, utter clown. You put up with the fact that he's a clown because he's highly productive. This year, obviously, he battled injury. And then you have all this stuff coming out with Drew Rosenhaus, how he broke his wrist in camp, which the fact that he even said that is asinine, because now you make the Dolphins look bad and you put them in a situation where they could be investigated by the league for hiding injury. But he did it to cover the ass of his client, so I understand it. He's a smart agent. He's a good agent, and there's a reason for that. So Tyreek basically says in a heat of the moment locker room after the game, after the season interview, that he wants out of Miami. Do I personally think that's the case? I don't. He got paid, which we're going to get to, where they extended his contract earlier in the year. And basically this season, from week one, it was that went on this entire year. And what was the first thing? Bang, he gets arrested right before the first game. And then the constant trolling, changing his avatar on Twitter to Antonio Brown, who quit on the Bucks a couple years ago. It's just one of those things with this guy. Like, he just doesn't get it. And they made him a captain, which is even more laughable. At the end of the day, the Dolphins are a better team when he's on the field and productive. But you have to start weighing the risk versus the reward. But here's the thing of it. Whether he wants out of Miami or not, the bottom line is the ramification. And this is where I love the media and I love the fan base. Like, do any of you pay attention to the cap ramifications? If they, number one, you don't trade a guy when his trade value is down. He had 1,700 yards back-to-back seasons. He had 900 yards last year. Clearly, obviously, he had injury things that he did, to his credit, battle through. But you have the media and fans sitting here saying, all right, well, he wants out. Well, you're going to trade him. And I get it. You can certainly make an argument if the guy's a cancer on your team. But the reality is, at best case scenario, after the draft, post June 1, if you cut him, it's basically a almost $16 million cap hit of dead money. And those who don't understand the salary cap, when you have a salary cap and you guarantee money for guys and you cut them, it's then dead money you cannot spend on your team. And if anybody was paying attention, Dolphin fans who are not all that bright to begin with, unless you were not paying attention here, their cap situation isn't going to be good to begin with. So the last thing this team can afford to do is have $16 million, which is basically two pretty good players, tied up. And, on top of that, if it's a June 1 trade, one, obviously you pass the draft, so you're getting nothing in the way of draft picks for this season. You're getting them for next season. And what is a team going to give you? A 5, a 3? Maybe a 2 if you find a really dumb team that knows you have to unload this guy. And if you do it prior, it's a $28 million cap hit, dead money. It's just, he's not going anywhere. Like, look, could it happen? Yes. I would bet my bottom dollar Tyreek Hill will be suited up in week 1 for the Dolphins next year, because it isn't going to make any sense financially at all. And you're going to deal with it. And then, okay, next year, wherever that goes, you have the conversation. But here's what I would say to Tyreek Hill. Shut up. Like, please. You've been a very productive player. You've been a distraction. You didn't have a good year. Now, granted, in fairness, injuries, Tua's injury, you're playing with horrendous quarterbacks. McDaniel, I don't think, did a great job of getting you open. But in fairness to the team and McDaniel, you dropped a lot of balls. You dropped numerous, touchdown balls in the 49er game and numerous other games. I don't need to hear your mouth now, because all it does is it screams of this dysfunction. And when you run an NFL franchise, even if you have a subpar year, you can have a subpar year without dysfunction. Free agents don't want to deal with dysfunction. Rookies don't want to deal with dysfunction. Top-notch coaches don't want to deal with it. They don't. And we've had it over the 25 years of not making the playoffs. Wow, amazing stat. You didn't make the playoffs for 25 years, and how many of those years were dysfunctional? You actually have gotten yourself up until this point to a place where dysfunction was not the order of the day. You've had some, you had Bullygate back in 2013, and you've had some different things here and there. But overall, there's been like this kind of like rebuild of, confidence in Greer and McDaniel and culture and this and that. And now, bang, you get some dumb like this that wipes a lot of it out. So if you're Tyreek Hill, shut your mouth, get healthy, come back with a vengeance. You already got paid. You got an extension, which we're going to get to extensions. And now it's time to shut your mouth and actually go to work. So that's the Tyreek Hill situation. So The second thing I want to touch on would be in the post-mortem press conference with Mike McDaniel and Chris Grier, and you heard rumblings through the media of this. They're talking about lateness. They're talking about players being late to meetings, to practices. They fine players when they're late. And basically McDaniel said in his press conference that he found out that fining millionaires wasn't the answer, and I'm paraphrasing, that there has to be higher ramifications. And here's where, as a 10-year season ticket holder, lifelong fan, I'm never late for games. I go to all of them and a handful of road games, and I'm there with bells on even when they suck. It's an insult to fans who pay top dollar that in a post-mortem press conference on a team that's 8-9 that hasn't won a playoff game in 25 years, that you're sitting here telling me about the fact that guys are late to practice and meetings when their schedule is regulated by the CBA and it's as soft as to begin with. You mean tell me that you can't get to a meeting on time on Monday afternoon? Guess what, brother? The reason you haven't won in 25 years is because you don't do the little things well. You don't go to meetings on time. And I got a coach who thinks it's okay to fine guys. No, you know what you do, Mike McDaniel? Cut him. If you did that, you'd send a message. And it's insulting to this fan base. And you can say what you want. The fan base, they're fickle. They are what they are. But the good Dolphin fan shows the they do. And it's an insult to them, the fact that this is what we put up with. That this is what we're talking about. You know what? We'll talk about you made mistakes personnel-wise. You didn't go after guards. You don't believe in the O-line enough. You didn't get a backup. We'll get into all of that. But the fact that you can't get to meetings on time, guess what, fool? In the NFL, you win the game Monday to Friday. That's when you win. Sunday, you show up and you execute what you practice Monday to Friday. It's an insult that this franchise puts up with this. It's an absolute insult. Okay, I'm done. So, now going into the press conference more of Mike McDaniel and Chris Grier, they talked about, I just mentioned it, the offensive line. Last year, right before the season started, Chris Grier said in a press conference, the media is more worried than the fans about the offensive line than we are. That's cute. It's considering your offensive line was an absolute disaster. And then he said, this year, we're going to put onus on the offensive line. Hallelujah. All I know is this. The first free agent signing, the first draft pick, if the name doesn't start with guard, I'm not interested. Because you have a quarterback who's small and injury prone. You have a running game that basically has been non-existent for 12 weeks. You don't understand that in the playoffs, in the cold, you need to run the ball with power. And now you're going to tell me you believe in the offensive line. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And to the point of all of this, they're having a press conference after Stephen Ross, and I should have went over this earlier, where he kept them, Grier and McDaniel. And I'm hoping there were some super crazy conversations around if you don't get off to a fast start and if you don't win the division and win, in my opinion, 2 playoff games, fuck one, that you're both gone. And a lot of people will say you could have fired Grier and McDaniel. And look, I'd fire them both tomorrow, personally. But where they would screw it up, and I'm glad they did what they did, is they would have fired one and not the other. They would have fired Greer. He's been here longer. And then you would have tried to go get a GM, and a new GM. You wouldn't have got the top-notch guy, because the top-notch guy wasn't going to come in here saying, hey, I got to be married to Tua and Mike McDaniel. So I'm glad they're both coming back, because now the pressure is on. And look, I want them next year to come out and win the Super Bowl. What I don't want is them to come out and be 1-3 or 1-4 and then fire McDaniel. Because in-season coaching fires, we've done it a couple times. We did it with Philbin. We got Dan Campbell, which, amazing. Dan Campbell now is going to probably take his team to the Super Bowl. Amazing. Timing is everything, I'll tell you. And he was the interim. You did it with Sperano. The in-season move, it never works. The guy who's in the incumbent, the coordinator, it never works. So you hope now, you're glad they came back, because now the pressure's on. And if it don't happen, both of them can go, because it's been a complete shit show for basically a year and a quarter. If you go back to the Raven game of New Year's Eve, where you lost 59-10 in a joke embarrassment of a game, you were basically fighting them to be the number 1 seed. You then blew the division and then had an 8-9 season. Inexcusable, in my opinion. 100% inexcusable. So now the pressure's on. So, going into, I'll try and be positive to end this, into 2025, what I would say is this. The team is not bare. They can beat good teams as we've seen, beat bad teams as we've seen. They can have, last year, obviously more than this year, explosive offense. If you give me Tyreek, which again, it's another factor of all this, you're clearly a better team with him when he's healthy and his head screwed on straight. You got a lot out of the tight end position in Jonnu Smith. You got a lot out of A-Chain. You got to rebuild your line. You got to rebuild your D-line. You're going to probably need new safeties, because Holland is going to be gone most likely. And Poyer, please don't let the door hit you where the good Lord split you. Goodbye. Retire. You're going to rebuild some stuff, but the cupboard isn't bare because you did pay these guys and you have them under contract. Yet another reason why they didn't let Greer and McDaniel go. It was never going to happen. You're too financially tied to guys. So, what do? If I'm the Dolphins, like I said, number 1, I am scouring for the top free agent guards. I will overpay for them. I'm letting Armstead go. He's a very good player, but it ain't going to work. We can't live in the, hey, you never practice and you play 60% of the snaps. You got Patrick Paul in his spot. You're going to have Austin Jackson coming back, which was a big loss. Aaron Brewer was a good signing at center. You got to rebuild this line. Get me a guard free agent and a guard first-round pick. They have number 13. I have zero problem. And one of the problems you've had with this team is they listen to the fan base and go get a receiver. Go get Jalen Waddle. Well, guess what? Jalen Waddle's a very good player. He's an insanely overpaid player at this point, but he's a very good wide receiver. But guess what? The Lions, who are now division champs and on a fast track to win a Super Bowl, they took Penny Sewell, who is a Hall of Fame offensive lineman. Okay? And they built a team that's tough, physical. They found a good quarterback. They drafted well. They drafted skill positions, and they're tearing people's faces off. And you're sitting here with Jalen Waddle, who had 58 catches, making $30 million. You're paying these 2 wide receivers $60 million, and they're not even in the top 30 in catches. It's laughable. And again, I like Jalen Waddle. He's a good player. But he's not a $30 million player, And you paid him early, but you didn't pay the guard you had, Robert Hunt, who ended up getting $100 million, which was completely overpaid. But you could have paid him probably a third of that a year ago. Same thing you could have done with Christian Wilkins to fortify your trenches. But the bottom line is you don't believe in the trenches, and that's your problem. You believe in overpaying Jalen Waddle to be a $30 million basically B-plus receiver when he should be making 15. And that's where you wonder, they got a mulligan in this year, Greer and McDaniel. You wonder, will they change their ideology? Will they say, this fast shit doesn't work? We can be speedy and fast, great. But we need to punch you in the mouth in December in the cold in Buffalo, in Baltimore, in Cincinnati, in Pittsburgh. To win a big game in December, to win the division, to get home field in the playoffs. Do they have that in them? I'll believe it when I see it. So building the trenches. And then obviously one of the biggest things was the backup quarterback. Another laughable moment of this press conference was Chris Grier sitting here telling us how they were in contention, which I believe, to get some of these backups. And it was a matter of money and they didn't want to give up compensatory draft picks. So anybody who doesn't know how compensatory draft picks work, when you lose certain guys at certain positions and then they play certain amount of the season, you then get compensated when they leave your team in a draft pick. So like for this year, they would have gotten a third-round pick for Christian Wilkins, but he didn't play enough snaps. He went out after 5 games. But they do have a couple of third-rounders that they're getting, and it's kind of this give-and-take game. You get guys, you lose guys. You get picks, you lose picks. So they're sitting here in this press conference saying how they didn't get a top-flight backup because they were a little worried about compensatory picks. Are you me? First of all, you could take the compensatory pick that you drafted Cam Smith, who's done absolutely nothing in the last 2 years. And if you would have given me, take your pick of backup, Jameis Winston, Andy Dalton, whoever. And I'm not even saying those guys are the answer. But when you look at this season and you look at 8 and 9, you flip 2 of those games around, you'd be in the playoffs as a 6 or a 7, maybe even a 5. And you go back to the Colt game, where if you had a competent quarterback, you would have won. The Titan Monday night game, if you had a competent quarterback, you would have won. That's 2 games right there. And then obviously, the Jet debacle was the Jet debacle. It's the difference between winning and losing. And ultimately, this team has talent. They're not devoid of it. They have overpaid talent, but they have talent. They don't have enough young talent, but they have older talent. And when we look at this scenario, that's the difference. But you're worried about compensatory draft picks, of which you've drafted horrendously in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round. So, as we go into 2025, I'm going to try and be positive. I actually think, if I was predicting it today, I actually think there will be improvement. I do. I call me nuts. I probably am. I think there will be, because I do think there's going to be a back against the wall pressure scenario, and I do think they're going to address some of this stuff. Now, will they create, and can they put the toothpaste back in the tube on the culture? I don't know. The lateness, all that stuff that I went off on a tangent on, I don't know. But I will say, I think they will be better next year. I don't think it's going to be dramatic, but I think you'd probably be 5, 6, or 7. But that's not good enough. You need a division winner, and you need minimum one playoff win. I think 2, because the bar for this year was 1. So I want to thank everybody who's put up with me this year. It's been really fun to do this. I'm obviously a diehard fan and passionate and crazy. Let's go Dolphins in 2025. Let's have a great offseason. Schedule out in May. Going to have an international game. Let's see what 2025 brings. I always say this. 1 year is going to be our year. I don't know when it's going to be, but 1 year. And that's why you're a fan, because you're always believing, you're always there, you show up on time, and you believe that eventually things are going to turn around. So, signing off. We'll see you next year for the Dolphins Make Me Cry podcast. Thank you so much. Take care.